The pervasive notion that one can simply move on from the past, shedding its burdens like an unwanted cloak, is a comforting illusion deeply embedded in popular discourse. It suggests a linear progression of self, where yesterday's experiences are filed away, accessible perhaps for nostalgic reflection or cautionary tales, but ultimately inert in the face of today's conscious will. This narrative, championed by self-help gurus and cultural maxims alike, posits the individual as a sovereign agent operating predominantly in a perpetual present, capable of choosing their reactions and charting their course independent of buried histories. It is a powerful, optimistic vision, yet one that a deeper, more unsettling psychological inquiry reveals to be profoundly incomplete, even misleading. Sigmund Freud, the architect of psychoanalysis, offered a starkly contrasting perspective, one that insists the past is not merely prologue, but an active, often tyrannical force operating beneath the surface of conscious awareness, shaping desires, dictating choices, and constructing the very framework of our present reality. Freud's most radical and enduring contribution lies in his mapping of the unconscious mind, a vast, dynamic reservoir of repressed memories, primal urges, and unresolved conflicts that exert continuous pressure on conscious thought and behavior. The past, in this view, is not relegated to dusty archives but remains vibrantly, sometimes violently, alive in this hidden realm. It is here that the foundational experiences of early childhood, particularly the complex interplay of drives, parental relationships, and societal norms, are internalized, forming enduring patterns and internal objects that serve as templates for future interactions and self-perception. To underestimate the power of this unconscious past is, for Freud, to misunderstand the very engine of human motivation and the source of much psychological distress. The seemingly spontaneous decisions of today, the inexplicable attractions and repulsions, the recurring cycles of triumph and failure, these are often not pure expressions of present intent, but echoes and reenactments of dramas long concluded on the conscious stage, yet perpetually playing out in the theater of the unconscious. The Freudian lesson is thus a challenging one. Confronting the past is not a matter of historical curiosity, but an urgent necessity for anyone seeking genuine agency in the present. It implies that true freedom is not found in ignoring history, but in painstakingly excavating and understanding it, bringing its hidden influences into the light of conscious awareness where they can finally be challenged, reinterpreted, and integrated, rather than remaining masters of destiny from the shadows. This foundational principle, that the past is a living, breathing entity within us, forms the bedrock of psychoanalytic thought and provides a critical counterpoint to simpler, more palatable explanations of human behavior. The roots of understanding how the past shapes the present are not solely located within the nascent field of psychoanalysis in fin de siècle Vienna, though Freud undoubtedly revolutionized this understanding. Hints of this profound connection can be traced back through philosophical traditions pondering memory, personal identity, and the weight of experience. Thinkers grappling with concepts of habituation, the formation of character, and the indelible marks left by significant life events were, in a sense, circling the periphery of what Freud would later articulate as the unconscious compulsion to repeat. Literature, perhaps more intuitively, had long explored this terrain. Greek tragedies, for instance, frequently depict characters whose fate seem preordained not by external gods, but by the inescapable consequences of past actions, familial legacies, or inherent, often unrecognized, flaws stemming from their origins. Shakespeare masterfully portrayed how buried guilt, unresolved grief, or childhood trauma manifest in adult madness, destructive behavior, and inescapable cycles of suffering, illustrating a deep, albeit pre-analytic, grasp of the past's persistent power. However, these were largely descriptive insights, lacking a systematic framework for why and how the past wields such influence beyond simple causality or moral consequence. Freud's genius lay in attempting to provide that framework, shifting the focus from the visible effects of past actions to the invisible mechanisms within the mind that preserve and utilize past experiences. He didn't invent the idea that childhood matters, but he transformed it from a platitude into a complex dynamic process. His early work with hysterical patients, presenting physical symptoms with no apparent organic cause, led him to hypothesize that traumatic experiences, particularly those deemed unacceptable or overwhelming, were not simply forgotten, but actively repressed, pushed out of conscious memory into a separate, inaccessible system he would call the unconscious. These repressed memories and the intense emotions attached to them did not vanish. Instead, they found indirect expression through symptoms, dreams, and neurotic behaviors, acting as constant, unseen puppeteers. This was the crucial context for his discovery, the realization that inexplicable present suffering was often a symbolic language spoken by a buried past. The hidden dynamic here is the active nature of repression and the unconscious mind itself. The past isn't a passive historical record, it's a living entity within the psyche, constantly seeking expression and resolution, albeit in disguised forms. The unconscious operates on different principles than conscious thought, timeless, illogical, driven by primal urges, the ID, and shaped by internalized prohibitions and ideals, the superego. Experiences, especially traumatic ones or those involving intense conflict, like the Oedipus complex, understood broadly as the child's negotiation of desires and rivalries within the primary family unit, become structural components of this unconscious landscape. The mind, in its effort to protect the individual from overwhelming pain or unacceptable truths, walls off these experiences, but the energy associated with them, the unresolved tension, remains active. This hidden energy then finds outlets in the present, often compelling the individual to repeat the original situation or aspects of it, the compulsion to repeat, Wiederholungswang. Why repeat something painful? Perhaps a misguided attempt at mastery, a perverse comfort in the familiar, or simply the hydraulic pressure of unresolved psychic energy seeking discharge. This is the insidious way the past remains in control, not as a conscious choice, but as an unconscious imperative, a script being reenacted without the actor's awareness of the original play. Consider a generic illustrative case, a person who, as a child, was repeatedly belittled and shamed for expressing emotions, particularly sadness or vulnerability. The context is an early environment where emotional authenticity was met with harsh criticism. The overwhelming pain and confusion led the child to repress these experiences and the associated feelings. They learned, unconsciously, that vulnerability is dangerous. The hidden dynamic is that this repressed trauma and the resulting defense mechanism, shutting down emotions, avoiding intimacy, remain active in the unconscious. As an adult, this individual finds it impossible to form deep, trusting relationships. Every time intimacy looms, an overwhelming, unidentifiable anxiety surfaces, causing them to withdraw or sabotage the connection. They are unconsciously repeating the pattern of avoiding vulnerability, dictated by the buried fear of shame and rejection from their past. This isn't a conscious decision to be alone, it's an unconscious dictate stemming from a repressed history, a clear example of how the past, via hidden dynamics, dictates the present, often against conscious desire. The way the past's influence manifests often disguises itself as something inherent, natural, or simply an unchangeable aspect of personality. This is perhaps one of the most powerful mechanisms by which its control is maintained. By appearing as an innate trait or an unavoidable circumstance, it sidesteps scrutiny and resists challenges. We hear and use phrases like, "That's just how I am, I've always been this way," or, "It's in my nature," when describing persistent behaviors or emotional responses. These formulations provide a sense of stability, even inevitability, but they also serve to obscure the historical roots and dynamic processes that actually produce these characteristics. This self-perception, often reinforced by others, "Oh, she's always so anxious, he's just bad with money," normalizes patterns that are, in fact, products of specific past experiences and the unconscious mind's handling of them. The context for this disguise is partly cultural. We value authenticity and consistency, and labeling behaviors as inherent feels more authentic and less effortful than viewing them as complex, changeable outcomes of psychological history. Society provides ready-made categories: the worrier, the free spirit, the cynic, that individuals readily adopt, often unaware that these identities may be built on foundations of past trauma or developmental conflicts. The hidden dynamic behind this naturalization is multifaceted. Firstly, it's a defense mechanism in itself. Attributing a pattern to innate personality, "I'm just shy," is far less threatening than exploring its potential origins in painful past experiences, e.g., early social rejection. It allows the individual to avoid confronting the vulnerability and difficult emotions associated with those memories. Secondly, the unconscious, operating outside linear time and logic, doesn't present its material as historical narrative. Instead, it manifests as feelings, urges, anxieties, and behavioral impulses in the present moment. The individual experiences the result of the past's influence, the sudden urge to flee, the disproportionate anger, the inability to trust, as a present-day phenomenon easily mistaken for an intrinsic part of their being. The lack of conscious access to the historical cause reinforces the illusion of naturalness. Furthermore, the compulsion to repeat, described earlier, contributes significantly to this perception. When an individual repeatedly finds themselves in similar difficult situations, e.g., serial relationship failures, recurring workplace conflicts, it feels like an external inevitability or bad luck. "Why does this always happen to me?" rather than the unconscious recreation of an internal, historical dynamic. The sheer persistence of the pattern makes it feel natural. Consider the generic illustrative case of someone with a deep-seated fear of failure that manifests as chronic procrastination and an inability to complete projects, despite having the capacity to do so. The context might involve a childhood where love and approval were conditional upon exceptional performance, or where significant failures were met with harsh punishment or withdrawal of affection. The pressure and fear associated with this past became internalized. The hidden dynamic is that the unconscious mind, remembering the overwhelming anxiety and potential loss associated with past attempts at achievement, or failure to achieve, generates intense anxiety whenever a new task presents a possibility of judgment. This anxiety is experienced in the present as a paralyzing fear or an inexplicable lack of motivation, not as a relic of childhood. The individual rationalizes this as laziness, bad habit, or simply not being cut out for certain challenges, thus naturalizing a pattern that is, in fact, a complex defense against re-experiencing past emotional pain. The procrastination feels like an inherent flaw. "I'm just a procrastinator," when it is actually a behavioral manifestation of a deeply buried, active fear stemming from a specific history. This process of naturalization is powerful because it conceals the very thing that needs to be understood and changed: the active influence of the unconscious past. This disguised dominance of the past has profound implications for individual and collective autonomy. If our thoughts, feelings, and actions are, to a significant degree, dictated by unconscious scripts written in childhood, how much genuine free will do we truly possess? The context of autonomy is typically understood as the capacity for self-governance, the ability to make choices based on conscious reasoning, values, and desires, independent of external coercion. However, the Freudian perspective introduces the concept of internal constraint, the unconscious forces that limit our options, skew our perceptions, and compel us towards certain outcomes, often without our awareness. The tension between psychological determinism, the idea that behavior is caused by antecedent factors, including unconscious ones, and the feeling of free will is a central philosophical and psychological debate, and Freud's work leans heavily towards the former, suggesting that much of what we perceive as choice is, in fact, overdetermined by forces beyond our conscious reach. The hidden dynamic undermining autonomy is the unconscious setting the agenda. While the ego, the conscious, rational part of the personality, attempts to navigate reality and make deliberate choices, it is constantly under pressure from the demands of the id, primal drives, the criticisms of the superego, internalized moral and societal rules, often mirroring parental voices, and the need to keep repressed material contained. Decisions are not made in a vacuum of pure reason. They are compromises, defenses, and attempts to manage internal conflicts that originate in the past. For example, a person might consciously desire a fulfilling career, but unconsciously, the fear of outshining a parent, superego guilt, or the anxiety associated with past failures, repetition compulsion stemming from early criticism, creates internal barriers. The choice to stay in a dead-end job, to self-sabotage opportunities, or to avoid taking risks might be rationalized consciously, but the true dynamic is the unconscious veto, the hidden power of the past restricting the range of available futures. The defense mechanisms employed by the ego to manage unconscious conflict, e.g., denial, projection, rationalization, further erode autonomy by distorting reality and limiting the individual's capacity to respond authentically to the present moment. One might project their own past-based anxieties onto others, perceiving threat where none exists, thus limiting their ability to engage openly and freely. Collectively, this dynamic of the past influencing the present manifests in societal patterns, cultural norms, and intergenerational trauma. The context is that societies, like individuals, have histories of conflict, oppression, trauma, and specific ways of relating. These histories are internalized not just through explicit teaching, but through unconscious transmission within families and communities. The hidden dynamic is that collective anxieties, unresolved historical grievances, and patterns of relating, e.g., dominance/submission, fear/aggression, are passed down and reenacted across generations. Epigenetics offers a fascinating, albeit complex, biological parallel, suggesting that the trauma experienced by one generation might leave chemical marks on DNA that influence gene expression in descendants, potentially impacting their stress responses or behavioral tendencies, thus biologically embedding a piece of the past into the future. Sociocultural norms around gender, race, and class often reflect and perpetuate historical power dynamics and past traumas, limiting collective autonomy by prescribing roles and imposing limitations based on historical contingencies, not present realities or individual potentials. Consider the generic illustrative case of a family with a long history of migration and loss. The context is a collective past marked by instability and the repeated need to leave everything behind. The hidden dynamic is that the anxiety and grief associated with this history become an unconscious undercurrent within the family system. Children grow up absorbing this anxiety, perhaps developing a pervasive sense of insecurity, an inability to form lasting attachments, or a deep-seated fear of change, even if they have never personally experienced the trauma of displacement. This collective past, operating unconsciously through family interactions and unspoken fears, limits the individual member's autonomy to build secure lives, take risks, or form stable connections in the present. They are, in a sense, living out the anxieties of their ancestors, dictated by a past they did not personally inhabit, but which lives vividly within the family's unconscious dynamic. This demonstrates how the past's power extends beyond individual psychology to constrain collective possibility. Given the profound and often hidden power of the past, the question becomes, how can one reclaim control over their present and future? Freud's answer, and the core purpose of psychoanalysis, is not about erasing the past, which is impossible, but about understanding and integrating it. The primary context for this process is the analytic relationship, a unique environment designed to make the unconscious conscious. This involves creating a space where the individual feels safe enough to explore their deepest fears, forbidden desires, and most painful memories without judgment. The couch, the analyst's consistent presence, the rule of free association, saying whatever comes to mind, no matter how trivial or embarrassing. These tools are designed to bypass conscious defenses and allow the unconscious to reveal itself through slips of the tongue, dreams, fantasies, and, crucially, the dynamic of transference. Transference is a key hidden dynamic in the dismantling process. It refers to the patient unconsciously reenacting past relationship patterns, particularly those with significant figures like parents, onto the analyst. The patient might experience the analyst as critical, abandoning, or seductive, not based on the analyst's actual behavior, but based on their internalized models of past relationships. Analyzing transference allows the patient to see how their past experiences continue to shape their present interactions and perceptions in real time within a controlled environment. This is a powerful form of insight, not just intellectual understanding, but an emotional and experiential grasp of the past's influence. However, the process of making the unconscious conscious is fraught with difficulty. It is the hidden dynamic of resistance. The unconscious, having worked hard to repress painful material, resists its exposure. Patients may forget appointments, fall silent, intellectualize, or express intense hostility towards the analyst as ways of defending against confronting buried truths. This resistance is not mere stubbornness, it's a vital sign that important, warded-off material is close to the surface. The goal is not simply insight, but working through beaten. This involves repeatedly exploring the same themes, understanding the connections between past and present on deeper and deeper levels, mourning the losses and disappointments of the past, and gradually integrating the previously disavowed parts of the self. It's a slow, often painful process of digesting history rather than being consumed by it. Psychoanalysis, in this sense, is a tool for historical re-engagement, allowing the individual to revise the internalized script dictated by the past. It is a process of mourning not just the traumatic events, but the lost possibilities, the defenses that limited growth, and the illusion of a different past. A generic illustrative case, a person who chronically struggles with assertiveness, allowing others to dominate them. The context is a childhood with an overbearing parent who punished any attempt at independence or expression of will. The hidden dynamic is that the fear of this parental punishment and disapproval is internalized, leading to an unconscious association between asserting oneself and experiencing severe anxiety or anticipated rejection. In therapy, this pattern emerges in various ways. The patient might be overly compliant with the analyst, afraid to disagree, or feel intensely anxious when talking about their own desires. Through analyzing this transference and exploring childhood memories, the patient gains insight into the origins of their fear. The work then involves repeatedly confronting this fear in the safety of the analytic relationship and gradually experimenting with assertive behavior outside of therapy, integrating the understanding that the past threat is no longer present. This isn't a quick fix. It requires working through the deep-seated anxiety and fear associated with assertion until the past's hold on the present behavior weakens, allowing for genuine, present-based choice. This Freudian journey from the past's hidden dictatorship to the potential for present autonomy is not linear nor guaranteed. It acknowledges the profound difficulty in changing deeply ingrained patterns shaped by early life and reinforced by unconscious processes. It challenges the superficial optimism that suggests change is merely a matter of conscious decision or positive thinking. Instead, it posits that meaningful change requires a deep, often arduous, excavation of the self, a willingness to confront pain, confusion, and uncomfortable truths buried within the unconscious. The process of psychoanalysis, or any therapy significantly influenced by its principles, is not about eradicating history, but about transforming the relationship with it. It's about moving from being a passive recipient of the past's dictates to becoming an active interpreter and, eventually, author of one's own narrative, informed by but no longer enslaved by what came before. The tools of psychoanalysis, free association, dream analysis, the analysis of resistance and transference, the long process of working through, are designed precisely for this task of bringing the hidden dynamics of the past into the light of conscious awareness. They provide a methodology for deciphering the language of the unconscious, for understanding the origins of symptoms and character traits, and for tracing the lines of influence that connect childhood experiences to adult struggles. This is a painstaking, often lengthy process, demanding courage, perseverance, and a deep commitment to self-exploration. It is not a journey for those seeking quick answers or simple solutions. Unexpected connections can illuminate this process further. Consider the act of artistic creation. For many artists, their work is a way of processing, expressing, and working through past experiences, including trauma or difficult emotions. The recurring motifs, themes, and emotional tone in an artist's body of work can be seen as manifestations of their unconscious past finding expression, a form of externalized, working through, or even repetition compulsion. The creative process itself can be therapeutic precisely because it allows the artist to give form to the formless anxieties and emotions rooted in history, bringing them into a space where they can be observed, manipulated, and potentially integrated. Similarly, narrative therapy, which focuses on helping individuals reauthor their life stories, echoes the psychoanalytic aim of integrating the past into a coherent, less destructive present narrative, albeit through different means. Even technological attempts to simulate therapeutic environments, while vastly different from the depth of human connection in analysis, speak to the enduring human need to process difficult experiences, to find ways to confront and understand the past that continues to shape us. Ultimately, the lesson from Freud is not one of despair or inescapable determinism. While it emphasizes the profound power of the unconscious past, it also offers a path towards greater freedom. That path lies in awareness. It is the courageous act of turning inwards, with or without the aid of a therapist, to explore the hidden corners of the mind, to listen to the whispers of the past, to understand the roots of our present patterns. This understanding doesn't magically erase the past, but it disarms its coercive power. It allows us to recognize when we are reenacting an old script and gives us the possibility, perhaps for the first time, of choosing a different response. It transforms the compulsive repetition into a conscious choice. In conclusion, the simplistic adage of moving on fails to grasp the intricate, often subterranean ways in which our personal histories remain active forces. Freud's psychoanalytic project offers a far more nuanced and challenging perspective. The past is not merely over. It is a living entity within the unconscious, shaping our present experiences, relationships, and sense of self in ways we rarely recognize. It dictates our actions not through conscious command, but through hidden dynamics like repression, defense mechanisms, and the powerful, often destructive, compulsion to repeat. This invisible governance severely limits our autonomy, making many of our seemingly free choices predetermined outcomes of unresolved historical conflicts. The normalization of these patterns, presenting them as innate traits or unavoidable circumstances, further entrenches the past's control, making the individual feel powerless against their own history. Yet, the Freudian lesson is ultimately one of potential transformation. By bringing the unconscious into consciousness, by painstakingly exploring the historical roots of our present suffering and limitations, we can begin to dismantle the past's tyrannical hold. Psychoanalysis, with its specific tools and the unique dynamic of the therapeutic relationship, provides a structured method for this excavation and integration. It is a process of making the implicit explicit, the hidden visible, allowing the individual to work through unresolved conflicts and mourn past losses, thereby freeing up psychic energy previously bound in repression and defense. Reclaiming control from the past is not an act of willful forgetting, but an act of courageous remembrance and profound understanding. It is the difficult, ongoing work of integrating our fragmented history into a coherent self, one that acknowledges its origins but is no longer enslaved by them. True freedom, from a Freudian perspective, is not the absence of the past, but the ability to relate to it consciously, to understand its influence, and thereby gain the capacity to choose how we respond in the present. It is a journey from being directed by an unseen history to becoming the conscious architect of our own future, informed by, but not dictated by, the echoes of what has been. This transformative process is the enduring power and challenge of the Freudian lesson, an invitation to look inward, understand the roots of our being, and in doing so, reclaim the vital space of the present. The question for each of us is stark and unavoidable. Are we merely reenacting the dramas of our history, or are we finally ready to step onto the stage of the present as conscious agents? The path to true autonomy begins with facing the past that lives within.